What's up, YouTube? Des the Mess back here. My pronouns are she, they. Today we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting and relevant topic to my life, of course. How does a Satanist navigate Alcoholics Anonymous? So, if you're not familiar with Satanism, we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you're not familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to be talking mostly about that. So, as someone who has considered herself a Satanist for more than a decade, I want to say I started identifying with Satanism when I was about 20, and I'm 32 now. So, it wasn't the same type of Satanism, right? My ideas on that evolved. My original application of Satanism was from the Satanic Bible, the Church of Satan. As I got older, I just didn't vibe with some of it. It has a more libertarian feel to it that, as I progressed on my journey, I needed to step away from. And as I moved into leftist politics, I found the Satanic Temple. And I was about 24 when that happened. Because I became a card member of the Satanic Temple in 2015. So I had an 8-year run with membership with TST. At this point in my life, I still consider myself a Satanist. I'm simply not a card member. I don't belong to any official religion as far as it goes on paper. But I do consider myself a Satanist because I carry some of the values of rebellion and bodily autonomy and seeking justice. I'm not anti-God, I'm not anti-religion, I'm not anti-Christianity, I'm anti-oppression, I'm anti-racism, I'm anti-sexism, I'm anti-bigotry, I am anti-capitalist. All of these things better form my ideas of Satanism. A big theme in most forms of Satanism, whether it's theistic, non-theistic, atheistic, etc., is about self-empowerment. Some Satanists believe that through work we do in this life, we become more as gods. There are some Satanists who describe themselves as I-theist, meaning I am God. There are, specifically atheistic Satanists who believe that the whole point is just to empower and enrich ourselves through material means, if that's what that means to you. For me, I look at knowledge as power, and the more that I know and the more that I learn, the more powerful I become, the more closer to what my idea of divinity would be, which, is an all-powerful, all-knowing entity. Because I don't believe that a supernatural God exists, I have to use metaphors. So I use the metaphors of God and Satan to determine what it is that I want in my life and how to achieve that as best as possible. So if a Satanist doesn't believe in Satan, why call themselves Satanists? The short term is the short version is Satanism is sort of post-Christianity, right? So we take the imagery of Satan from Christian religions because that's where Satan comes from. Some more than others will culturally appropriate different, satanic deities or like evil deities, dark gods, if you will, from other religions. I try as much as possible to stay out of that sort of debate. It's not my lane to get into. What I will say is I like the image of Satanism, the metaphor of Satan, specifically the imagery of Lilith, right? Lilith being the first wife of Adam, who, all things considered, was intended to be very submissive and do whatever he wants and shut up, right? Which you can look back and say that's kind of where the beginnings of the patriarchy in the church began, is that a wife should be subservient to her husband because Lilith was supposed to be to Adam. She rebelled and was kicked out of the garden, and as a result, God made her into a demon. She ends up, hitting it off with Samael, who is a demon. I'm not like hip to demonology, so I don't know all the legions and levels that they go to. But the abridged version is she hits it off with Samael and becomes the mother of vampires. And that's lore for you. So what happens next? Adam is put to sleep, and here's a scientific spin on this, right? I'm gonna piss off some people, but I like this interpretation of the creation story. Adam's put to sleep, and God uses some of his rib marrow to create Eve, who will be his second wife, who starts the population of humans on Earth, essentially. Here's the really funny thing about that. If you believe in the creation story as told in the Bible, that Adam was put to sleep, God used a rib to create Eve, in scientific terms, that would mean that Eve is a clone of Adam. And because clones, genetically speaking, have the same sort of chromosomes as their donor, we can infer that Eve would have had the XY chromosomes. Therefore, Eve is the first trans woman. Therefore, God created Eve as a trans woman and performed gender-affirming care on her to give her, the womb that she needed to form the population of Earth. Which means, in a weird way, Eve is Adam's sister/daughter/wife. I don't like all of that, but if you're gonna look at the trans lens of it, it's literally written into the Bible. I'm getting off on a tangent. This is supposed to be about AA, but I want you to know why that's important to me as a Satanist, right? As someone who reveres Lilith, who was the first feminist, who stood up against Adam and said, I'm not laying down and letting you do what you want to me. If this works for both of us, it's good. If it doesn't, I'm out. And that was about setting boundaries, and that was about sticking up for what we believe in. So all of that wrapped up is a short answer of like what makes me a Satanist, right? I'm pro-trans rights, I'm pro-feminism, I'm pro-intersectionality. I want justice. I want actual justice, not the fake legal system we have. So how does a Satanist navigate AA, knowing what we know now? Well, you need some background on AA. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who... I should just read it from the book, because I got the book in front of me. I'm not going to find the specific pages that's on. I pulled up the 12 steps, because that's what we're going to talk about. So Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who are struggling with alcoholism, drug addiction, and other self-destructive behaviors, habits, if you will. And it started in the 20s, and it became an international phenomenon. Lots of people have been helped by it, but lots of people have been hurt by it, and that is what I think doesn't get talked about as much. So there's a lot of religious and specifically Judeo-Christian imagery underlying the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. As someone who didn't grow up in a religion, me, it doesn't bother me. Like, it does and it doesn't. It doesn't personally bother me. It bothers me on a social level that we could have this, in some cases, legally forced on people, right? If you get a DUI, a judge can sentence you to go to AA meetings. And if you're an atheist or an agnostic or a Satanist or a pagan or anything that's not Christian, you might struggle with the ideas laid out in this book. And there's nothing wrong with having, a disagreement with the way the program is, or having criticism for how it's laid out. Again, it was written in the 1920s by presumably cishet white guys who came from money, who came from Christian backgrounds. Some of them were more agnostic, not really atheist. If there were, they were quieted. There's a whole chapter called We Agnostics. Eventually, I'm going to make a whole series running through the big book and how we can apply what's good and throw away all the garbage. Because there is a decent amount of garbage in 2023 standards. So I'm going to run over these 12 steps and talk about how I, as a Satanist, have applied this program to help me, get sober and then stay sober. So, short facts about me. May 9th, 2018 was the first time I ever truly got sober. I got into some trouble the night before, came down off of my acid trip, and was like, I got a fucking drug problem, I can't do this anymore. So after a couple weeks, ended up in rehab and figured that out. I lasted about 19 months before my first relapse. I didn't tell anybody about it. I was kind of ashamed. I also, I wasn't ready to stay sober at that point. So I kept using for a little bit, and then finally in January of 2020, I got honest. We know what happens in 2020. That I was about a month sober at that point, and got a new sponsor. COVID happened, so we're kind of working the steps. I don't remember what frustrated me the second time. I barely remember what frustrated me the first time. I kind of just wanted to see if I could smoke weed again. And it immediately, I was like, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to lose the sober house that I live in, and I'm on probation. All these problems. So anyway, I get sober a second time. I start working the steps again. Ended up getting really frustrated, and I drank. And I drank a bit. And I called my sponsor, and he was not happy with me, naturally. So we parted ways, and I continued drinking on and off a little bit, smoking sometimes. And then Sober Faction, around March or April of 2020 came into my Facebook feed. So there were 200 of us. There was no meetings yet. It was just, at that point, just a small support group, essentially. Anyway, a couple months into this transitionary period, I decided to stop drinking and smoking again. I wanted to be sober. I decided I wanted to save my life. I've said this before in my other video, and I'll say this every video that I reference this sort of discussion. Nobody ever saved my life. Nothing could save my life. I had to make the decision to save my life. I needed to matter enough to me to make the changes that I needed to find recovery and then stay sober. I had the tools, I just needed to go for it. So I'm doing AA and Sober Faction at that time. Sober Faction, of course, is the satanic recovery program out of the Satanic Temple. At this point in my life, I am not affiliated with either TST or Sober Faction, nor am I really affiliated with AA. So this is an experiential monologue about how I navigated AA. So I need a new sponsor, of course, and we were doing backyard meetings because it's COVID and you need to be outside, and lots of churches and stuff weren't accepting large groups. So we're meeting in a friend of a friend's backyard, and I really liked what the person who would become my sponsor would say. And I asked her, I was like, hey, like I recently relapsed, I'm coming back around, and I need a sponsor. I need someone who gets me. I like what you got to say. So we talked about it, I laid down some stipulations. I was like, I'm a trans woman and a Satanist, so if either of those two things bothers you, I gotta know now. Funny thing about AA sponsorship is most of the time, the sponsee, the person seeking to be sponsored or is actively sponsored, doesn't set stipulations for sponsors. It's kind of like you're asking that person for help, and you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, as they say. And so it was just kind of funny that from the get-go, I knew what I wanted and I knew what I needed for myself, and my sponsor actually respected that more, because I was like, these are my needs, and if you don't fulfill them, I need to go somewhere else because I'm trying to save my life. So through working the steps for probably the fourth time, the first time with her, but the fourth time that I'd gone through them at that point, or tried to anyway. I did them successfully twice in the past and then relapsed. Then I got, to step 3 or 4 in the second round, and it didn't work. And so here we are. And this time it clicked, and lots of things clicked. I had 2 different support groups. As I said, I was doing 2 programs on the subject of AA, right? A lot of these talks that I had with my sponsor are going to be condensed into the format that I have for this video. So how do I approach step 1? Step 1 of Alcoholics Anonymous. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I'm a Satanist. How am I supposed to give up my power or admit that I'm powerless, right? If I'm a Satanist, I'm supposed to be self-directing. I'm supposed to carve a path in my life that works for me. I'm supposed to make myself the most powerful thing in my life and move forward with that. How do I do that if I'm admitting I'm powerless? Well, first of all, for me, again, this is all my experience. I don't speak for anybody else. I just hope other people can relate if this is a struggle they have, right? Not everybody has options outside of AA. You could be in a very small town and there's 3 AA meetings and nothing else. There are tons of recovery programs. I'm going to link some below in the video. Find something that works for you. This is just my experience. How does a Satanist navigate AA when right off the bat we're being told that we're powerless and our lives are unmanageable? Well, I admitted that. I was defeated by alcohol and drugs. I couldn't stay sober on my own, right? I'm an abstinence person. I can't do a drug. I believe in harm reduction. I believe in non-abstinent recovery for people for whom it works. I'm not one of those people. I can't casually or recreationally use a drug. I'm going to find a way to sneak it into my everyday life and abuse it, and then I'm starting over. So I'm not doing that anymore. So for me, that's powerless, right? Like, I have power until I put the first one of whatever it is in me. I drink coffee, or at least consume some sort of caffeine, usually tea, but I have to be careful with that, right? Because I've abused caffeine in the past. I used to drink over a gallon of coffee a day. That's a lot. That's really bad for your kidneys and liver if you didn't know, especially when you start adding sugar. When I was doing that, it was like literally the biggest, Dunkin' coffee I could get, and I would scarf it down, and I would get to work, and I would pour a gallon, I'm not exaggerating when I say it was a gallon pitcher of iced coffee, and I would drink that. Obviously partially watered down because it's ice, but like, I worked at a camp, so we have these, gallon water pitchers or whatever, and I would drink that like it wasn't a problem. I would have couple shots of espresso that my boss would freshly brew. Sometimes I would do a little bit of pre-workout. I was drinking. I was smoking at this job. This is 2014, 2015. So you can see how easily, like, the thrill of caffeine got to me there. So today, I limit myself to like a cup of coffee if I'm gonna have it. And I don't drink it most days, but I do drink it often. Pretty much any day that I work, I drink coffee because I need more mental focus. I don't have a coffee machine at home. Um, I don't want to be one of those people who depends on coffee. I just, needs a funny word. Just need that little kick sometimes. So knowing all of this, right, that's a form of harm reduction for me. But I also don't consider caffeine a serious drug in the same way that, like, for me, alcohol, marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, the couple of pills that I've tried. So when I look at that all in perspective, I was powerless over alcohol and drugs. My life was unmanageable because I was on probation, right? I got in trouble in 2018, and that followed me into and through the pandemic. I was bouncing from sober house to living situation. I struggled to keep a job and wasn't able to keep myself sober. To me, that's unmanageability. I couldn't have any sense of control over my life, and I tried. I tried as much as I could. I was fighting an uphill battle. So that part's easy, right? I admitted I was powerless over alcohol and drugs, and my life had become unmanageable. Really easy. So then my sponsor, we get to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore our sanity. People struggle with that. There's arguably an ableist affect to this, right? The idea that someone struggling with drugs and alcohol is insane. I don't believe that's true for every person. I believe for me, I needed to recognize that I had short-term insanity in the times that I thought I could continue using drugs and alcohol successfully, and that eventually something would even out and it would, whatever, it would just work. It never did. It never did. So how do I restore my sanity if I had previous bouts of insanity? And how do I do that? By believing in a power greater than myself. Again, if I'm a Satanist, the underlying intent is that I am the power in my life. I need to, make my way in this world by whatever means necessary. So how do I do that if I believe something is greater than me? Well, the short answer is my sponsor had a modicum of sobriety. So clearly she knows what she's doing, right? I wouldn't have asked her to be my sponsor if I didn't trust that she had the length of sobriety that she did and had advice and suggestions that might affect me in a positive way. That's easy. I don't believe my sponsor was my higher power in that way, but I believed that was a power greater than me, right? That a better version of me was possible. I had 2 support groups at the time, Sober Faction and AA. Those things are more powerful to me. There are people in those groups who helped contribute to my well-being and had my best interest in mind. That's a power greater than me, right? That hope, that community, that connection, those are powers greater than me by myself who just wants to do drugs and alcohol and feel miserable about it. It's easy for me to digest these things. I know it's not easy for others too, but this is the way that I had to work the program because it worked for me in that way. I didn't have a lot of options. Courts weren't going to accept, weird meetings. They wanted me to go to AA. They never mandated it because I had already started going before my court started processing. That's another story that I'll get to on another time, is like my last day of using. So all of that, is like, I see people as a power greater than me. Why? Because 2 people can achieve things that one person can't on their own. It's simple math to me, right? Like, me working with my sponsor, I'm way more likely to stay sober than if I was just winging it on my own. I've tried, small stints of sobriety in the past, in my early to mid 20s. They didn't last long. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have a program. I didn't have any sense of introspection. I just thought if I stopped using for a short time, problems would go away and then I could go back to using again. And I carried some of that mentality the first time I got sober for real, and the second time I got sober after my first relapse. So it's really easy for me to see all of those things that I've mentioned as power greater than myself, right? Like the combination of my communities, and the people who love me. Love is a power greater than me. I don't fully understand love all the time. I know that I feel it, and I know that it's there, and I know you can't touch it, see it, smell it, hear it, you just feel it. That's a power greater than me. I don't have to fully understand it all the time. I know I love people, and I know the people, I know people who love me, and that's greater than me. That is totally greater than me. And yeah, like, I believe in that. I came to believe that my love for people and my communities and all of these things could help restore me to what I consider a sane state, which is holding a job and paying my bills and being there for my friends. Made a decision. This is step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This one throws so many people through a loop, right? If you don't believe in God, how are you supposed to turn your will and your life over to Him? I look very carefully at the way this is worded. Made a decision. That's easy. I can make a decision to turn our will and our lives. So if my will is my thought and my life is the culmination of my actions, turning my thoughts and my actions over to the care of God as I understand Him. I'm using their language. So as that one word really changed the way that I looked at the AA program. For some people, God as they understand Him is like, well, God as I understand Him is Yahweh, the Judeo-Christian God. For some people, that's Allah. For some people, that's Buddha. That is, Kali. That is a lot of different concepts of what God is. God as they understand God are those deities. For me, as is at the moment, right? When you say something like as soon as, that's at the moment that you understand God. I don't have to turn my will and my life over to the care of a God I don't believe in if I never understand what God is. I'm not going to get off on a rant because it's really easy for me to rant about ideas of God, right? I'll save that for another one. But for me, navigating the AA program as a Satanist, how do I get to a point of reconciliation with understanding God? And I don't. I just don't, so I don't care about it, right? It was easy for me to turn that back around and say, well, I don't understand God. I don't believe in God. If science proves there is a God or is not a God one day, I will fully throw my support behind that, the facts, whenever they're presented. Until then, I just don't care. So, going back to the Satanist roots of this, right, if I'm supposed to be my own God, as it were, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. I make pretty bad decisions when I'm by myself, and I know that. So, for me, it was more about turning this into something I could digest to get through the step, to make it work. And there are a lot of acronyms, there's great outdoors, good orderly direction. The one I liked the most because of how relevant it was to my experience was gift of desperation. Because I was desperate enough to say I don't want to go to jail, I don't want to fail at probation and have the charges, I had a felony for possession of acid, and I had 2 operating a vehicle intoxicated. In Ohio, that's OVI. Other states, it's DUI or DWI. Language is different, concept is the same. I was driving under the influence. And my felony is now sealed because I successfully completed probation. I still have those OVIs on my record, but after several years, that stuff won't really matter. It's since been almost 3 years since I got off probation, and that feels really good because I worked for that. I kept my abstinence enough, and I worked programs that helped me maintain sobriety so that I could complete probation and make myself a better person. So for me, I was desperate, right? I was desperate enough to ask my sponsor in a backyard friend of a friend's meeting to help me. And we worked through this, and we had these tough discussions. I liked the fact that her idea of God was like some faceless, nameless thing. She says when she prays, she doesn't know who's listening. She just feels like someone is. That's fine, right? That worked for me, because I told her, like, I struggle with the prayer thing because I'm a Satanist. I don't look at prayers as like appealing to God to give me a better day or to bless my friends or something. For me, prayer is a psychological effect. I'm setting an affirmation, right? Like, I don't pray. I tried it in the past. I thought there were good results as far as emotionally. It's kind of a placebo effect, in my opinion. So when I prayed, and I thought, I just hope I have a good day, basically. It didn't make the day better. It just made me more prepared for, like, if there were road bumps, I was like, well, this is something I can get through. I've gotten through worse, and I'm going to face harder things in the future, more likely. So all of that wraps up to say that I don't believe in God. I didn't have to believe in God to get through this step. I just believed enough that other people had my best intentions, or other people had good intentions for me, right? They had enough love and care and support for me to help me through this. And I had a sponsor who understood that I wasn't ever going to believe in God, even though she did, and even though other people thought that was weird sometimes. And we made that work. And we moved on to step 4. This one's tough. I think it's easy in some cases for anybody to be able to do. Excuse me. But it's also really tough when you consider the underlying aspects of it. So step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I have trouble defining morality. I sometimes see things as black and white, and other times as giant gray spectrums. It's really hard for me as a human to think that I have any idea about what's moral in this world. I have ideas. I certainly have ideas. I apologize for yawning. I have good ideas. I think they're good ideas because other people reinforce them. I have bad ideas, and I think they're bad ideas because other people have pushed back against them. So, how do I know what's moral, what's right? I think it's moral to seek social justice and to fight climate change and to, fight against racism and sexism and all the other isms. So, to me, that's moral, but to someone else, that stuff isn't moral, right? Like, how do I make a moral inventory? Well, I'm being too heady about it, right? I'm focusing on the big picture. What is moral to me? What are the things that I can say objectively I did wrong to other people? I'm not going to list them off here, because it's nobody's business at this point. But when I broke it down that way, and again, I've had a handful of sponsors. My first real sponsor, I came out as trans to him. We were in a men's rehab center, and he supported me. He didn't know how. He's like, I don't know what to do with this, but we'll figure it out. And he did, and he became an ally, and I think that's amazing. Through that, experience, we were working on the steps, and that he broke it down to me that, not everything that I did in the past should be carried with me today. When I acknowledge that, I can let go of some of these things, it was a lot easier to write them down. And I wasn't perfect at it, and sometimes I left things off on purpose, and other times I left things off on accident, right? We're supposed to do this to the best of our ability. That's the point. I'm supposed to make a list of people I've harmed and people who've harmed me. That's the crux of step 4. That's the moral inventory. Is who have I hurt, including myself, and who's hurt me? And once I have that list, I gotta share it. And that's step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Again, we're taking God out of this conversation. For me, that's easy. whatever. The first time I did my step 5, me and my first sponsor sat in the chapel of the rehab center, because of course there's a chapel there, and we talked about all this stuff, and then we did a little prayer and meditation, and he sent me off to bed. It was like 3 a.m. We shouldn't have been up that late, but we're doing step 5 work. It wasn't that big of a deal. And I have to admit all these things, right? Like this, the second time I was thorough with this with my last sponsor, I told her about, some of the things that I wasn't ready to give up yet, that I went through with my first sponsor, and I was like, look, these things still drag me down sometimes, that's why I'm listing them. I've added a few since my 2 relapses. I put those on there. I got rid of a few because I was able to work through them in a combination of AA and therapy. So she was cool with that, right? Like, I'm not supposed to rehash every bad thing I've ever done or every time everyone's hurt me for the rest of my life. If I've moved through them in a healthy manner, then that's the point. So the exact nature of our wrongs, right? For me, that was recognizing where I know objectively I did something wrong and I needed to never do that thing again. Sometimes that's easy, right? I've done something heinous before, I'm never doing that again. I never did it before, I did it the one time, and I never did it since. And I moved on, and I was able to move on, again, through therapy, through program. I didn't just wake up one day and be like, all right, I'm absolved of every wrongdoing I've ever done. I can't forgive myself in a day. I had to work on this. And there are still days that, some of my past creeps up and bogs me down a little bit. But I'm able to work through it a little bit better because I have all of these tools now. So we move on to step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. Again, we're taking God out of the equation. Or you know what? Let's keep the term God for gift of desperation. I was ready. I was desperate to be a better person at this point in my life. I just spilled my guts to my sponsor, and she's like, go home and meditate for 10, 20, 30 minutes if you can, and just let yourself be free of all that stuff and know that we're past the hard part. And that really is. For a lot of people, doing a step 4 and 5, like making a list of all that garbage and then airing it out to someone, that's really hard. It's something most people do over the course of a lifetime in therapy. This one thing happened to me when I was a kid, or I did this terrible thing when I was a teenager or early 20-something. Let's talk about it for an hour, right? And then they don't talk about the next thing until their next session. This AA is like a condensed version of lifelong therapy in the 4th and 5th step, and like, all right, here's my list of things. We're going to spend the next 2, 6, however long, how many hours it takes talking about it, and like, they're not giving you answers to the life's puzzle about, well, if you did this, you should do that, necessarily. It's about working through it together. So what are my defects of character? Well, again, if I'm a Satanist, I don't want to shame myself. I don't think I am a defective person. But I started to really dig in. Again, this comes back to my sense of morals. What is defective about society? What are the things I don't like in society that reflect on myself, right? Things that I've done that I'm not proud of from my step 4. Ways that I've acted, thoughts that I've had that were terrible. What does that say about society? What are the things that I think are actual, like, character defects? Well, they're things, in my opinion, like racism and sexism and transphobia and all of those sorts of things. Then it was easy for me to start dialing back, right? Recognize where I've been problematic in the past and have an idea of what it is I want to work on and what I see in other people, and maybe how to treat them better in spite of what I see as ignorance. Not everyone is going to be as educated or enlightened, we'll say, as the next person about different social issues. I don't want to get off track here, but it's really easy to point the finger at someone else and be like, you're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. It's harder to look in at ourselves and say, I'm being a problem, what can I do to change it? You know, I don't have to tell everybody else how they are. I simply have to be a better version of me and hope, if I want to be some sort of, role model, and I think I kind of do if I'm doing videos on YouTube. I want to know that the example that I'm setting for other people is to be a better person and not to continue, the viruses that we've created, social viruses like racism and sexism and patriarchy. I don't need to do all that stuff. I don't need to contribute it because I feel like at this point I've personally risen above it. So it's really easy to look at those things within me and say, you know what, those are character defects that I have to work on for the rest of my life. I'm never not, I'm never in a position to say I'm not racist because I'm a white person. I benefit from things that people of color do not. So I can't say that I'm not. I can be anti-racist, but because I still benefit from the society that was built on the exploitation of other people by white folks, that's what it is. So I just have to work on that sort of stuff. And when I really dialed into that, it started to make more sense to me. So then step 7, humbly asked him, meaning God, to remove our shortcomings. Again, for me, I was desperate enough to say I need to forgive myself. I need support from other people. Excuse me, this video is going to be so full of yawns. I needed support from other people to work through my shame and my guilt, and I needed to be able to forgive myself. And through that, I could recognize my shortcomings, right? Shortcomings are not like character defects. Some people say they're interchangeable. I think shortcomings are aspects of what AA would consider character defects, right? Like always being late to work. Like that's kind of in the character defect level. Being late because I simply choose, to stay up too late once a week or something. That's kind of a shortcoming, right? It's like, well, I shouldn't have stayed up that late last night and now I'm late for work. The bottom line is stuff like that happens to people every day, so I can't beat myself up for being late to work or like not calling a friend back or something. And sometimes I do, sometimes the weight of decisions like that seems a lot heavier, and we'll talk about that stuff at a later time. But I can't think that I'm removed from shortcomings, even as a Satanist, or even as this like all-powerful mover and shaker of my own life. I am never free from fallibility. I can only be a better version of myself today than I was tomorrow, and I can only be a better version of myself today than I was yesterday, and hopefully better tomorrow than I was today. And when I look at it that way, I can forgive myself a little bit for transgressions, and I can apologize and make amends with people, which brings us into the 8th step. Made a list of all persons we had harmed. That's pretty easy when you have a step 4. And became willing to make amends to them all. So they say it's best to work these steps in order, right? You shouldn't skip around because they have an outline. You do 1, right? Well, I'm powerless over alcohol. I need to believe that something can help me, whether that's God or whatever else, and then I'm going to work with my sponsor to recognize the harm that I've done and talk to them about it, and then see how these things culminated in negative coping mechanisms and, bad aspects of my character. And then I'm going to make a list of those people that I know that I hurt, and I'm going to work on figuring out a way to make it right to them. I became willing to make amends to them. In some cases, it's family and friends. Sometimes it was me. That was a tough one. The very first time I went through the steps was recognizing I hurt myself and not registering that right away. I hurt myself every time I skipped work or walked out on a job because I wanted to get high, or threatened my rent situation, my living situation. I hurt myself by not taking care of my car, which got me to and from work, and by allowing my parents to enable me because I was not financially responsible. And I'm still not perfect at that. But I hurt myself in all of these ways. I used to think if I'm just smoking weed and ignoring the world, I'm not hurting anybody, less so myself. And then I started to come into this idea that, like, well, I might not be hurting other people, but maybe I am hurting myself, and that's okay because it's my choice. And yeah, like bodily inviolability and the freedom to choose, if that's something someone wants to do, I'd never tell them not to. But for me, it was recognizing all of the pain that I caused to other people because of the way that I was treating myself, because I didn't care. I didn't care about my own well-being. Someone pulled a gun on me one time in traffic, and I, was like, want me to blow your fucking brains out? And I was like, I don't need those, and like, I didn't realize that guy could have, right? I didn't care at that time. I was at such a low point in my life, in my, mid-20s. And then my girlfriend is sitting horrified in the seat next to me, wondering if that guy's really gonna pull the trigger. And I'm not supposed to see how that doesn't affect her, that probably traumatized her. And I just didn't care, right? I was like, well, I'm only hurting myself. Like, no, I'm not, right? I was focused on just getting high. I didn't care about her well-being. I didn't care about mine, certainly. If someone's gonna pull a gun on me, and I'm like, yeah, go ahead. It's nuts. It's nuts to think that I didn't care enough about myself. And now here's a chance to look at that. I'm a person that I hurt. My friends and family are absolutely people that I hurt. But if I'm supposed to be directing my life in a better direction, I ought to work on myself so I can actually be there for the people I claim to care about. So we're moving on to step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. In my experience, this is a part of the step people don't always look at, is whether it would hurt someone else, right? I hurt someone pretty bad in the past, and I considered the first time I went through this step, I was like, do I reach out to them? Do I apologize? Blah, blah, blah. I think, and I can only make this decision on my experience and through lots of therapy and through lots of support from people who I leaned on in these programs, it would re-traumatize me and the other person to rehash that and be like, hey, I just wanted to call you. I know it's been years since this happened, but like, we should talk about it because I owe you an amends and a true apology. And it's like, I had to make peace with myself knowing that wouldn't be a good idea, right? Like, I'm getting weird feelings about talking about it now. But like, not everyone from your past needs to get a phone call or a letter or a text message that says, hey, I want to talk to you about this experience we had, and so I can make amends because I'm sober now. It's like, good job, superhero. Like, you're 10 years too late. It should have never happened in the first place. And recognizing when we have those moments with other people is really important for our own mental health, and I think for our recovery in general, right? I don't have to re-traumatize other people, right? There are people who don't want to talk to me because of things that I've done to them. They didn't want to talk to me then, I don't want to know if they want to talk to me now, and I'm okay with that. There are people I never want to talk to, for stuff that they did to me that was less than things I've done to other people. And recognizing that, well, if I don't want an amends from this person who screwed me over, why would that other person want it from me? And maybe that's not my position to judge about if someone, really deserves my amends or doesn't, or if I deserve theirs. I'm not here to split hairs over this, right? Like, I recognize for myself and my recovery, I've moved so far on from the person who I used to be that it's better to just keep moving. And there are things that, like, I don't bury them, I just don't dig them up anymore. And I think that's super important, knowing when things are just dead and you gotta move on. It's really hard. It's really hard, and I'm not perfect at it, and I still have tough days, and I still have flashbacks, and I found out that a lot of the things that I went through were traumatizing, whether I did them or whether they were done to me. Stuff happens and we get traumatized, and for me to keep living in those cycles and re-traumatizing and giving myself the flashbacks and the auditory hallucinations and all the terrible stuff that comes with trauma, I don't need to do that. I needed to make amends to people who I knew I could, and who in my opinion, I could make a better way forward. My ex, right, the one who sat in the car when that guy was threatening me, she didn't want to talk to me when we first broke up in 2018, and now she's one of my good friends, right? Like, I was able to actually make it up to her, and we don't talk all the time. It's, but we have a sensible friendship. I couldn't have imagined that in 2018. I tried to make amends to her in 2019, and I failed at it. And then we didn't talk again for a couple years, and I finally reached out and was like, look, I treated you like garbage our whole relationship, and if you don't want to talk to me, that's fine, but I need to make this right. And maybe that was selfish of me. But the fact that she was willing to look past everything that we'd gone through and consider herself my friend today, right? Like, at the time, I probably didn't deserve that, but I'm starting to come to terms with the fact that I deserve positive things, and I deserve friendship and love and support. And sometimes that comes from unexpected places. And being able to make that up to someone who I probably hurt the most over the course of a few years, like, that feels good. That's a sense of healing that I haven't gotten from anywhere else. So I've made those amends, right? Like, it's easy for me, if I'm supposed to be a self-empowering, self-correcting Satanist, it's really easy for me to see where making amends and working through these things is going to be to my betterment, and is going to be to the betterment of the communities that I take part in, and hopefully society as a whole, because I stop living in this, well, it was done, so it's over with mentality, and I start saying, no, like, I've worked through this, I've made that right. If I make a wrong in the future, I can try to make that right too. And it puts me in a cycle of solution instead of victimhood and blaming myself and hurt people, as they say. I'm not trying to hurt people anymore, right? That part of my life is hopefully done. I want to move forward, and I continue to move forward because I can make amends and do right by my actions to the best of my ability. So now I've made amends, right? I've made amends with people as much as possible. I've wrote letters to people I couldn't talk to so I could just get that shit out of me. And it's time to move on to step 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I hit on that. I don't do this every day, right? Some people make lists every day of, like, their to-do lists. The inventory is, like, the opposite. It's, what did I do? What did I do good, and what could I have done better? What did I do wrong that I need to make right? I try to do these things as they happen. I was in a weird mood the other day, and a coworker was trying to be funny with me, and I was just like, look, I'm not in a good mood, and she's like, I'll just leave you alone then. And I felt bad immediately. I was like, I shouldn't have, it's not her fault that I'm in a weird mood, and I reconciled that. So it took time to, like, cool down, and when my mood started to get better, and I had a moment that I could, like, pull her aside somewhat privately, I was like, hey, like, I'm sorry I was short with you earlier. Like, I have stuff going on, and I know you do too, and you didn't deserve me to take it out on you that way. And we hugged it out. Stuff like that, right? Like, I don't need to go home at the end of the night and write a list and be like, I need to apologize to this person because I said something, or I didn't say something, or whatever. For me, that's how my daily inventory looks. It's like I try to recognize problems when they happen and apologize when the apology is there. And if it needs to be a proper amends, or I could be like, hey, look, I hurt you. What can I do to make this right? Most of the time, I don't need to get to the amends part because I'm not making major mistakes. I'm making simple human mistakes where other people can, kind of more easily forgive me. That feels good, right? I don't have the weight of like a bunch of bad decisions weighing me down from like a list of crimes and infractions I committed the day before. And there were days like that in my 20s where I was like, man, I did some terrible things. I don't have to look at that and, like, if the worst thing I do sometimes is be like, look, I'm not in a good mood, and like be stern with someone when I could have just been more polite about it, that's pretty that's pretty mild. And that goes back to step 7, right? That's a shortcoming that I had. Like, that's not removed from me, right? God didn't take that away. If there is no God, they're probably not focused on the little things that I do day to day anyway. So for me to make a mistake and then, not quite immediately, but within a few hours go back and correct that and be like, look, this was a wrong thing that I did, and I'm here to, recognize that. That's so strong. You wouldn't have found me doing that 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, definitely not 8. If I did something wrong 8 years ago, I would have denied it. I just never, that didn't happen. Because I didn't want you to know. And if you knew, you had power over me. That stuff doesn't have power over me because I'm able to correct it. And I don't do anything. The stuff I beat myself up over, accidentally being mean to a coworker because I'm in a weird mood. Like, I beat myself up over that. Not nearly as much, but like it feels that heavy as like the stuff I used to pull when I was actively using drugs and alcohol in my early to mid 20s. It's funny and it's not, right? Like, I'm recognizing how trivial some of this stuff is, that like when I make a mistake I can just go to the person and be like, look, like I overrode one of your boundaries, or I said something out of place, or whatever. Recognizing that in me and being able to work through it with another person is huge progress. And for me, that's super satanic. That's embodying what I see as like justice. Is like, hey, I did something wrong and it needs to be made right. It's self-empowerment. I'm recognizing when I stomped on someone else's boundaries because I wouldn't want that done to me, right? So now we both have a better sense of boundaries with each other. I built a better friendship in that moment by simply apologizing for the way that I responded to a joke. Like, and it was a dumb joke, but it was a good one. But the point is, that's super satanic to me because it's empowering. It's self-empowering that I'm able to apologize and recognize when I'm wrong and do something different and better about it. So we move on to step 11 now. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him. Praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. So my big book is littered with notes, as you can see. There's just notes and highlights and sidebars, and there's so much good stuff in here. This was the first big book that I got this in rehab, and I've read through it multiple times. I don't want to say I've memorized parts of it. Some of it I have. I'm using this as a guide because it's easy for me to be less distracted if I have the wording right in front of me. So, knowing all of this, right? Prayer and meditation. Again, those are psychological things. Anton LaVey talked about ritual in the Satanic Bible as this psychological effect. I'm doing ritual, in this case, prayer or meditation. I'm going to conflate the two. Not because I think that I'm like waving a wand and the world changes, or like if I get down on my knees and pray to God that my life will change. I don't do those things because I think that it will change the world, or that some supernatural power of some sort is going to change the world for me. If I engage in that sort of stuff, it's all psychological, right? Anton LaVey called it psychodrama. And the idea was I'm engaging in the practice to prepare myself mentally for the action, right? That goes back, in my opinion, to step 3, will and lives, right? My will is my thought, and my lives are the culmination of my actions. I will things into being. I think them into being by acting upon them. I don't simply, I'll pray for you and hope it gets better, right? Like, if I can do something, I want to do it, and I want to do it right, and I want to make a positive impact on the world. So when I engage in ritual, which is what my form of prayer and meditation would be as a non-theistic Satanist, I'm doing this because I'm setting an intention. This is something I want to talk about in later videos, because I'm fascinated by occultism and magical practices and how they can be applied in a philosophical and psychological way to atheists and non-theists and anybody who doesn't really engage with the idea of God or supernatural beings, how they can use things like prayer, ritual, meditation, or a magical practice to still make positive changes in their life. Because it's about the psychodrama, as I said. I'm going into this ritual with a goofy robe on and lighting a candle and an incense and yelling "Hail Satan" or whatever the hell I'm doing, knowing that's my safe space for me to empower myself to feel like, wow, I just did this really goofy thing and got a bunch of cathartic emotions off my chest, and I feel ready to go to that job interview tomorrow. That's it. That's what that is for me. I highlighted prayer and meditation because for me that's ritual, right? Like, there are times in the past that I have prayed. I have a satanic prayer book. It's a theistic, spiritual, Satanist prayer book, and I use that for positive affirmations. Meditation, I will never knock. Anybody can get into meditation no matter what your belief system is. It's just about trying to find the quiet in your mind. We'll have an episode on meditation at a later date because I love talking about it and how it can be useful and how you can do different layers to get yourself into one of the most serene states of mind I've personally ever been in. If meditation is something that works for you, definitely keep an eye out. Improving my conscious contact with God as I understood him. Again, I don't believe in God, right? I'm probably not going to come to a moment at the understanding, oh my gosh, there is a God. So as being that connecting word that I was talking about in step 3, hearing it again, God as I understand God, is nothing. I don't need to improve my conscious contact with it. I'm trying to improve my conscious contact with myself and the world around me. For me, this is what AA dotes on about spirituality, right? When they say this is a spiritual program, not a religious one, they're talking about the community and the connection you feel to other people that you can't really get in other places unless you're involved in a church or going to a concert, right? Like, there's something, I'll say magical as a joke word, but there's something magical that just feels right about being in a community of people who care about you and being connected to them. Even if we all have different belief systems, some of us do or don't believe in God or magic or whatever, there's just something that feels right. It's the same sort of feeling I get when I'm at a concert for a band I love and feeling surrounded by the hundreds or thousands of people who are there and knowing we're all connected. That's spiritual. That's spiritual in a secular sort of way. So I vibe with that, and I'm able to apply this to step 11 to see how I'm improving my conscious contact with the world around me. Like, if there is a God, it's very uncaring and nihilistic. Or it is simply the world around me, and I don't need to worship it because it just is what it is. So as long as I look at it in that sort of way, that I'm connecting to people, and I'm connecting to myself, and I'm getting a better understanding of myself and other people, I'm improving my conscious contact with other people and starting to do the right things. Praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Again, I don't believe that if there is a God, that it has a specific will in the world. The universe is way too chaotic and random, and things just kind of happen. going to talk about chain reactions in another video, because I believe there's an element of fate, we'll say, where we equally do and don't have choice. But all of that being said, I'm not praying for, I can't... If I think I'm talking to God, please take me off of YouTube, because there's something wrong with me. If I ever think that I'm talking to God or hearing messages from God, something has happened. Please get me psych help, because I'm not getting it for myself. All of that being said, I don't think praying to God and asking, for God's will, basically, is going to affect it any more than if I didn't do that thing. Right? And I'm not going to get into the long-winded arguments about, well, if there was a God, then everything's set in stone and blah, blah, blah. But to the effect that is true, if there was a God and God was all-powerful and all-knowing, then he knows everything that's ever going to happen. And me praying to, stay sober on a given day doesn't guarantee it's going to happen, because it might be in God's plans that I have a relapse because I needed character development. Right? So I can't think about what, if there was a God, what its will would be, because I only know the warped versions of God that every religion claims to have, and I'm not here for that. I'm simply not here for that. I'm here to do what I believe is right and find people who believe in those things and work on them together. And for me, that's the best way that I can apply this. And if I happen to do ritual to make me feel better about going to do it, then that's all the better. So now we're at 12, right? The 12th step of the 12-step program. Having had a spiritual awakening. I have this in a box. Having had a spiritual awakening. As the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. That's one of the most powerful statements in this whole 12-step program. For me, my spiritual awakening was, again, recognizing I connect to other people. I am not separate from other people. I am equally a reflection of everyone else as they are of me. I see things in other people that I see in myself. If I'm mad that someone else is acting a certain way, it's because I'm in contact with cognitive dissonance about things that I've done that are similar. Not everyone uses their blinker. When I'm driving, and I don't have a car anymore, but when I'm driving and someone doesn't use their blinker, and I'm like, you fucking idiot, you should have used your blinker. What about the guy behind me when I didn't use my blinker? He's doing the same thing. That fucking idiot didn't use their blinker. To me, that's what that's about, is recognizing I'm connected to every other person. There are things other people do, say, think that I don't believe in, and maybe I never did, but maybe there are aspects of those things that I recognize in myself that cause me to feel angry. Having had a spiritual awakening, I can then recognize those things. And again, I'm using the word spiritual in a secular sense. My spiritual, meaning my connection to other people in the world around me. Awakening, meaning the giant realization that, holy shit, I'm connected to other people in the world around me, and my actions have consequences, positive or negative, and I'm going to continue to have to do better in the world to make a positive impact and to hopefully be some sort of positive role model for people who see me. I need to be the best example of myself that I can be. So maybe, and I don't say this in an ego sort of way, even though it does sound like that, I'm not going out into the world thinking well, I'm just a good person, other people will be good too. But there's a chain reaction that happens, when you give someone $1 who's down on their luck and someone else sees you. Or maybe that person really needed the $1 and they'll give their $1 to someone else. Every time I've loaned, I don't like the word loan, but every time I've given someone money who's asked for it, and they're like, I'll pay you back. I'm like, pay it forward. Give it to someone else who needs it. I didn't need that right now. You did. Give it to someone else. My hope is that in that action, I can set a positive intention. That goes back to the ritual aspect. I've set a positive intention. I'm like, here is this money. Please do something with it for someone else who needs it. And I carry that attitude because people did that for me. There were times when I needed money when I was really down and someone came through. So I recognize that. There were times when I struggled that I didn't have food on the table, that I didn't have gas in my car. When I was young and doing drugs, there were times when I needed drugs and people helped me with that. And I know that's kind of a weird thing considering we're talking about sobriety, but all of that is to say there were times when I wanted or needed something that I didn't have and couldn't get access to, and someone put out a helping hand. And in doing that, they set a precedent in me that, like, maybe I should be kinder to other people in the same way, and paying it forward as much as possible and helping the next alcoholic in line. And again, I don't practice AA anymore. I say practice because it's a program of practice. You got to keep going and you got to keep working at it. I don't go to meetings like that anymore. I don't practice the steps. I obviously don't have a sponsor. I still keep in touch with old AA friends, including my first and my last sponsor. They both helped support me immensely in my recovery journey, in my transition. When I moved from Pennsylvania to Ohio, I didn't know anybody, and AA became the people that I knew, and it was really positive. I only gravitated towards people who had my best interests in mind, and who really wanted the best for me. And sometimes I was more picky than not about what I could see were obvious political disagreements, but I never wanted to be in a room where I felt unwanted or unwelcome. So I cultivated my AA program around that. How does a Satanist work the 12 steps of AA? Knowing all that we know very carefully, by coordinating it in such a way that I'm only seeking the best possible support, and I'm only hanging around with people who say, take your meds and drink your water and go to therapy, and did you go to a meeting today, and did you talk to that person you owed amends to? I want people to hold me accountable in recovery, in my sobriety. I want people around me who really care about me, who want the best for me. And I made that so emphatic when I started to learn how the AA program works from the fellowship perspective. It's why I got into service work. I chaired and secretaried some meetings. It's why I sponsored people. It's why I liked being a sponsee, because I grew a group around me who cared about my well-being and who wanted to see me succeed in recovery and then in life. Because once I'm recovered enough, I can keep a job and I can pay my bills on time and I don't have to worry about debts. I don't really have debt today, right? Like, there's a couple of medical bills I'm not worried about, but I don't owe any person money, someone I borrowed from, or whatever. That's so powerful. All of that is so powerful. That's part of my connection to other people, is recognizing I don't want to be in debt, right? I'm going to help people where I can. I'm going to do what I think is right in the world. I'm going to find people who want to do the radical, awesome things that we like doing to make a better impact on society. And now most of the people that I'm friends with are in recovery. That's huge. I never wanted this many friends when I was younger. I was like, I don't fucking need more friends. I got the couple of guys that I hang out with. We play video games, we smoke pot. Like, cool. And I'm still friends with those guys today. But it's just a weird contrast when I consider that the majority of my circle now are people who are sober and or in recovery. Like, that's huge. That is so huge. That I've made it this way. That's how a Satanist works AA, by taking all of the good from it and moving forward with it and saying that's bullshit and I'm leaving it behind. I'm not touching that. There is sexist, awful stuff in this book. There's one or two instances of obvious racism. I don't condone any of that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that those are the good things. I'm going to tell you what worked for me by recognizing this book is 100 fucking years old, and it's helping people help themselves and then to help other people. It's not perfect, and it's not ever going to be perfect, and there are way better alternatives, and there are new things cropping up all the time. I'm going to link some of those below. But I want you to know, if you are a Satanist in recovery and you're struggling, you don't have to do it alone. I hope that this helps. I hope that it gave some perspective to people who are Satanists, who only have AA available. I hope it gives perspective to people who aren't Satanists, who are in AA, or people who don't know about either, or both, or whatever. I just wanted to talk about my experiences today. I actually tried recording this type of video the other day, and my neighbors were throwing a party, and you could just hear the bass in the background, and it was making my mic pop, and I'm not in a soundproof room, so there's all of that. But I'm so happy to share my experiences and talk about these things because they're super important and other people need to hear them. It's why I was in AA for as long as I was, because I wanted other people to know this isn't the only way, but if you can make this work and it is something that you're willing to, I can help you. And if it doesn't work for you, there are alternatives, and you should find them, and you should find something that works for you. If sobriety or recovery or some form of abstinence or just getting off of your drug of choice or stopping a habit that is currently ruining your life, if any of that sounds like something that you're working on, like, I'm with you there and I want you to find it. I really do. So, all of that being said, if you liked everything that I had to say, please like, subscribe, follow me on the socials. Send me a couple bucks. I'm poor. I'm doing this unpaid. You know, you just got an undetermined amount of time of my unpaid labor to sit and talk to you about how I, as a Satanist, have navigated AA. So please do all the things. Comment below. Let me know what you think. Be real. Be yourself. Love the people around you. And if you can't, find people who will love you for you. Because that is so much of why I'm still here today. Again, I'm going to drop a bunch of links in the description, so check it all out. And with nothing else from me, you have a great day, night, morning, weekend. Time doesn't exist.